Welcome to another YouTube video for selfprinciple.org. Today we want to look at the Adventist study and look at what is the evidence that it provides around eating mostly plants. So let's take a look at the data and see how eating plants can be such an excellent part of our eating plan. So what was the study really about? Well, basically we know that there's some evidence that suggests that eating mostly plants or more of a vegetarian type eating pattern may be associated with a lower rate of death, but we need to have more data around it. That's according to the premise. So that was exactly what they wanted to take a look in this particular study. And what's important to note about this study is in order to look at a strength of a study or how good is it and how can we rely on it, we always want to see the word prospective instead of retrospective. That means we're looking forward in time and not behind. And it's also really important to note what are the things that they're trying to control for. Now, they can always be stuff they can't control for, but what they control for can help us to get a clear idea of how much value to give to the final conclusions. So, what did they end up doing? Well, they ended up actually recruiting about 73,308 participants after all of their exclusion criteria was met. And it was important to understand how they came up with their definitions for different eating patterns. So, if you were a non-vegetarian, according to them, that meant that you ate meat more than once a week. If you were semi-vegetarian, means kind of like a flexitarian, meant that basically you could have meat more than once a month, but really you had it less than once a week. Pesco, which meant you ate fish, and otherwise you were considered a vegetarian. So fish was more than once a month, but everything else in terms of meats was less than once a month. And lastly, lacto-ovo-vegetarian, they ate eggs and dairy greater than once a month. Now, of course, vegan was really straightforward because it was no eggs, no dairy, no meats, and the frequency, if you even had it, was less than a month. So in other words, if you had it one time in 2 months or something, that would count. So what were they looking for? Well, they wanted to see mortality. So the problem with trying to find data on things like what is the number of people that died is very difficult. And you end up requiring things like looking at tumor board registries, state indexes, and so forth to try to get that. And that always creates issues. Now, follow-up. This is one of the most important things we look at because the longer the follow-up, the more validity that you have or the more proof you have. So it was okay. It was 5.79 years. And then, of course, they adjusted for a number of things that were important so that you could compare essentially apples to apples. All right, let's get into the fun stuff. What are the results? So when they compared vegetarian versus non-vegetarian, what they found was that as you moved towards whole foods plant-based eating, your all-cause mortality went down 12%. Gender stratification, why this was important was what they found was that this wasn't significant in women, only significant in men. In terms of other stuff such as non-heart disease, non-cancer deaths, so they could be deaths due to kidney disease or diabetes-related deaths, those dropped 15% overall. And kidney deaths, surprisingly, and for a kidney specialist like me, not surprisingly, but to most people surprisingly, had a huge impact of going towards whole foods, plant-based, and even in endocrine, which would be diabetes-related deaths. Now, what about all of those different definitions I gave you earlier about the vegans, the lacto-ovo, which is dairy and eggs, and the pesco, which is fish plus vegetarian? I know those are confusing terms, but what did all that stuff mean? Well, if you looked at non-cardiovascular, non-cancer, which means basically things like kidney disease deaths or endocrine-related deaths such as diabetes, vegans had the greatest drop in mortality, 26%. Pesco vegetarians had a very significant drop and even higher slightly to 29%. Now, all-cause mortality, it turned out that those people who were doing lacto-ovo had a drop of 9%. Pesco, which were the fish eaters, had 19% reduction in the risk of dying from all causes. What about ischemic heart disease? Well, once again, the fish eaters had the reduction going on. Okay. So all that being the case, what should we really learn from this study? So in order to understand how to interpret the results, we always have to look at what were the things in this study that makes the data a little bit hard to gather. So for example, this is a cohort study that is only showing correlation, which means that if you wore a blue shirt today and it rained outside, I could say that, hey, blue shirts are correlated to rain, but that doesn't mean wearing a blue shirt causes it to rain outside. Now, the Seventh-day Adventist population is not representative of the U.S. population. They are very healthy to begin with. You know, for us at Self Principle, my mantra has always been to sleep more, move more, love more, and eat mostly plants. And the Seventh-day Adventists are the epitome of this. So you're taking a very healthy population, following them, and trying to tease out differences, which may be very hard to do. Versus in a general population, you may actually have very significant differences. And of course, whenever you do a study, there may be other differences that you haven't accounted for. Now, one of the things that's so difficult in dietary studies is that how often do you measure? Now, in this particular case, they did the assessment just in the beginning when they started the study. So in other words, people who were, let's say they were eating fish and they were vegetarians, may have decided to give up fish down the line, thinking that that may be the right thing to do. So people's dietary patterns can sometimes change, especially when they know they're being measured as part of a study. So they try to do what they think that the study authors would want them to do. So single measurements can pose an error. And of course, I have a hard enough time trying to remember what I ate yesterday. So if you're asking people in a long questionnaire all these details about what they normally eat, is it possible there may be biases? Of course. Now, what's important in the vegetarian group was that they were already older, highly educated, likely to be married. They drank less alcohol, smoked less, exercised more, and were thinner. So the vegetarian group versus the non-vegetarian group was already considered to be more in a healthier state, and that would have made it difficult to tease out some differences because they already have all these other things going for them. So the fact that the vegetarians came out ahead is not surprising, but the fact that it was harder to find differences between the different vegetarian groups, lacto, ovo, pesco, and vegan, could be because it's already a highly healthy group. And of course, the follow-up wasn't that short. But despite all of that, this is a large study, well-designed study, and it gives us a very important educational knowledge to take home. So what can you take home from this data? Very simple. If you eat mostly plants, you are going to have a lower risk of death from all causes. Now, if you can become all the way 100% plant-based, that is wonderful, because not only will you help yourself, you will help the environment, you will put a reduction or an end to animal cruelty, which to me is an incredibly powerful thing. But part of this journey is to help you move down that spectrum and to understand wherever we are, we can be better people. So I want to thank everybody for joining us for this important video. Don't forget to follow us on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and our website, selfprinciple.org. And we will see you next time. Thank you.